The amount of people that hate their job or don't like their job and go to work purely because they need to get money from somewhere. I think that we need to create spaces where we can experiment with alternative ways of organizing.
In the areas of business that can experiment, we want to be experimenting.
Yes.
Working towards this larger goal that you have of creating a space that's better for people and not against people. The goal is this being a space in which we can experiment, and hopefully the byproduct being that this is something that other people see and are like, oh, like something that we want to incorporate into our organization or to the way that we work or the way that we do things.
I believe there is a better way of coexisting as humans. But in order for anything to change, we need to prove that. We need to, at relatively large scale, demonstrate actually there's a different way that works just as well and probably better.
I am Isabel, and I'm joined today by Thibaut, who's our head of strategy at IQM. And for this first PVT that we're recording on strategy, we're going to focus on why we want to share this with you and how we use our strategy to guide what we do and how that affects how we operate at IQM.
Do you want to maybe say a few words on why I'm having this conversation with you? Because obviously, me as
Yep.
head of strategy seems relatively straightforward why I would be talking about strategy.
We're wanting to share this because I am helping you more on the strategic side, and so much what we do is integrated into how we do strategy. And so for me to be able to help up more and do more within the business, it makes sense for this to be shared with me.
So you were hired to help me in my domain in the broadest sense. We started with practical day-to-day things to build up that confidence and to start building also then your understanding of the business, your understanding of our processes and practices. One of the things that Stuart and I talk about a lot is when we're evaluating people, when we're talking about people, is about trust, right? Is do we trust this person to handle this size of responsibility, this size of task, this size of issue? We need to know and trust that you are working towards the same objective as we are. And so I think that's where this conversation becomes very useful. It will become useful for you earlier than it will for other people on the team, because the breadth of work that you are involved in, as well as the potential strategic level of it, the amount of prioritization, you'll hit that ceiling sooner than somebody who works on a specific product where they can take more responsibility on a specific project before having to think about the strategy of the business at large or the way we do things as a business at large.
When you're talking about the trust, are you saying that you have developed that trust with me because of the wide breadth of things that I do with you, or that the trust is integral to what I do because it's something someone in my role need to have?
The trust is not something that's specific to you or to your role. It's what's needed for Stuart or me to delegate any part of our domain to anyone in the business, in the way that we talk about what does good look like at IQM in terms of really clear communication, taking ownership of your domain, improving what's around you, and accepting people as they are. You're showing the right types of behaviors and results that we are looking for to be able to give you more responsibility and to increase that responsibility within the business, where then the next level of responsibility that we'd be looking at to give you more autonomy, rather than just taking more of the day-to-day operational stuff and me still being a bottleneck for the decisions, essentially. That's where we're looking at a bigger picture and a more strategic view. The behaviors we're looking for to build that trust are the same in any role. It's when you hit the ceiling of needing a bigger picture or a more strategic approach that comes sooner for a role within our domains, essentially.
Is there other reasons why it's important that you're sharing this with the broader audience?
I would say it's always good to explain how you do things, because it also pushes you to think about what you do and gain a better understanding of it. If you
Mhm.
unconsciously do things, you're never going to be able to improve them. Whereas if you realize what you're doing, you're going to be able to make a choice on, is that the right way to do it? Is that the way that I want to do it? So far, my domain, the everything else domain in the business, has been solely my responsibility with very little interaction with other people in the business. I haven't had to explain it really. And so there might be stuff in there that either we could do better or actually is very good and is worthwhile identifying those so that one, we don't lose them, and two, we can potentially transfer it to other people, either in the business or outside the business.
That brings up the reason why we discussed starting to record these was because there was a need for me to start understanding more of strategy. But just sharing this with me would then create the same bottleneck of, okay, now there's two people who understand it in the business.
I wouldn't want to fully replace conversations by just recorded videos and that kind of stuff, because part of explaining the status quo is also to allow room for questions, feedback, and challenges. If it's a read-only medium, a
Mhm.
recorded video, then we lose part of that. But it's definitely going to make it more easy for the rest of the business to access, because time is limited. I'm not going to sit down with everybody in the business for an hour every
Mhm.
week for months on end to make sure that everybody gets up to the same level of understanding that you will. So yes, it makes that knowledge more scalable.
Is there a reason we're sharing this with the world and not just sharing this
Yeah,
internally?
I think that nicely leads us into one of the reasons why I'm here, why I'm working at IQM, and what we want to do with the business. So probably 6 or 7 years ago, I was sitting in Stuart's living room, Stuart being the other director of IQM. Stuart's been working at IQM for over 25 years. So 6 or 7 years ago, I was sitting in Stuart's living room with a common friend of ours, Mark, and we were sitting there to recruit Stuart into a project we were working on at the time to build an educational game to help kids learn how to read more independently if they didn't have access to education or good education. I started that conversation by saying that I believe that the way we are organized as society, as humans, is relatively fundamentally flawed and could be done much better. You know, the way that we restrict people instead of giving them responsibilities and making them feel responsible for acting as a productive member of society instead of trying to punish them when they don't act as what we consider a productive member of society. The amount of people that hate their job or don't like their job and go to work purely because they need to get money from somewhere. I think that we need to create spaces where we can experiment with alternative ways of organizing. I believe there is a better way of coexisting as humans. But in order for anything to change, we need to prove that.
Mhm.
We need to, at relatively large scale, demonstrate actually there's a different way that works just as well and probably better. Politics is not going to do it. The best way that we have in a capitalist society is in a private organization, because as long as you pay your taxes, you can pretty much organize that group of people any way you want, right? If you want to say, I'm going to pay for the education of your children and healthcare of your whole family, and I'm going to make sure that no matter what happens, you're always going to have a roof over your head. As long as I can pay for that, nobody's going to stop me, right?
Mhm.
So essentially, I laid down that pitch of saying I would like to create an organization where we can start demonstrating some of those principles. And I realized that that's going to be a very long and arduous process of trying out stuff, failing, having to improve them, etc. But I want to create an organization where we start experimenting with those things, where we start building those things, and then we try and scale them as the business grows. Now, for that, obviously, we need a business that scales. So at the time, I was saying, well, we've got this idea for this game. Stuart didn't even want to hear about the game. He's like, I'm in. Whatever it is, let's just do it. That sounds great. However much Stuart might seem very like day-to-day focused when we're just running the business and making sure that everything keeps running, he wants to be a part of something like that. I mean, I talk about it exponentially more than Stuart does, but I don't talk about it a lot on a day-to-day basis. Fundamentally, that was the starting point for Stuart and me to say, let's work together on something. 2 years later, when the conversation came up about Bob, Stuart's previous business partner, to retire, and Mark and me to step into IQM and to take over the responsibilities that Bob had, that was for me the foundation to say, let's skip a few steps ahead in that process of building a business from zero. We've got this small but stable business with 3 employees and 2 directors that we can use to fast track our idea. Then we start with applying some of those principles to IQM, and we start to try some of those changes in how we do things. The compensation system, one of the most visible examples of, well, we want to try and do stuff differently. You know, other organizations do agile. We're not reinventing the wheel here. There are other organizations that use holacracy or a flavor of holacracy for their governance. But there are very, very, very few people who have a radically different way of thinking about how salaries are determined. There are some, but there are way, way less. When you ask me the question, why do we want to record this and share this with the world? One, I think when you want to share something with the world, then you pay more attention to how you do it. It's a bit less slapdash. The whole idea of this is that we want to prove it's possible to do things differently and be successful. I realize this is a ridiculously ambitious goal. But for me, if by the end of this, when I retire, IQM is still 10, 20 employees, it's still about the same order of magnitude as it is now. But other people have taken some of these ideas that we've put in place and they've experimented with them and they've scaled them, or the scale happens outside of IQM, then for me, that's also success. If in the end, the only thing we've done is create a nicer place for 10 people to work, that's also success. The business we're in ultimately is secondary to that goal.
So to help people live in a slightly different way or to lead them towards that way?
It makes sense for me is to create a space in which we can experiment with alternative forms of organizing ourselves as humans. The result of being that people are happier in that environment. Ultimately, if we go through a phase where it goes terribly because one of the things we've done doesn't work at all, that's also fine. We need to experiment with stuff. And when you experiment, you're going to fail inevitably. Right.
So the goal is this being a space in which we can experiment, and hopefully the byproduct being that this is something that other people see and are like, oh, something that we want to incorporate into our organization or to the way that we work or the way that we do things. And that because we're a space of investigating, tearing down, experimenting, trying to find different ways that work in organizing. And because we're always experimenting, always changing, always trying to grow, it then leads others to see what is possible.
Yeah, that's the reason why I think doing PVTs helps with that, vision, creates more visibility for us as a business and helps us with scaling, because we're ultimately in a capitalist society, you still need money to function. And so we need to make money. We need to be a profitable business. Beyond creating visibility and becoming a thought leader on certain topics, it also directly serves that idea of pushing the agenda, let's say, that we can organize ourselves in a different way.
How did you notice that there was something off that you wanted to change in the way that society was organized? Because I would think that most people are looking at the structure, but it seems like that's where that came from.
Great question. I'm not sure I don't have a ready answer for it, so I'm going to think out loud. I've been playing board games, video games, and role playing games for as long as I can remember. The first thing you do when you learn a new game is you understand the rules and try to optimize your actions within that framework to achieve whatever is determined as the objective of the game. And so I have practiced from a very young age analyzing systems within which I then operate and try and achieve a goal. I know that I think in a very systemic way. Like if I see a problem, if I can, I will try and make sure that it never happens again rather than solving the symptom. Sometimes I spend way too long solving a small problem that will never happen again, even if I didn't fix the systemic cause. But that is the way my brain is wired, whether that's through nature, nurture. And I think definitely games have a big role in that, or at least if there was a natural predisposition for me to think like that, games have developed that skill and improved that skill. I would say that the first place where a light bulb started to turn on and be like, maybe there's something here, something that we can do, is actually in role playing. When I was a student in Belgium, I was quite active in the live action role playing scene, playing in 3 or 4 different systems. Role playing system would be an organization of people who set up a game and they define their rules, the objective of the game, who can play, that kind of stuff. For people who don't know live action role playing, these are events with thousands of people who pretend for a weekend, a week, something along those lines, to be someone else. The way they regulate the interactions between themselves is governed by the rules of the game. And usually it involves magic and fighting and that kind of stuff. So there's a certain level of codification there. In my experience, role playing is a relatively good average representation of society, because you will get anyone and everyone who comes to role playing. I would say in Belgium, at least at the time where I was playing, there were about 3,000 to 4,000 people who would regularly play. And so there was a significant overlap of people who would play in different systems. You would encounter the same people in different systems. It was a relatively small world. And most people I would know, I would have at least seen them once, had some level of interaction with them. There was one system which was a very mature system and had evolved over a long period of time. It had evolved by becoming what I would call more restrictive. The rule book went from being maybe 10, 20 pages to ending up being probably more like 100, 150 pages, and explaining essentially all the ways in which you were not allowed to act, all the ways in which you would be punished if you were caught cheating. Right? This is exactly what you're allowed to do. And if you do anything other than that, we will punish you. There was a relatively high percentage of cheaters at that game. I would say probably everybody cheated a bit, because some rules they just thought that's a bit dumb. And there were like huge fights about people getting excluded from the game because they were cheating. And then the same group of people, significant overlap, went to a different system where the rules held on 2 pages. The majority of the rules were to say, this is our objective for this game. We trust you to help us all move towards that objective, having fun together, creating an immersive environment. And no cheating. Well, it's hard to cheat if there are barely any rules, right? But also, more importantly, no conflicts, way less conflicts about, oh, that's unfair. Way less people who got like excluded or prosecuted because they weren't subscribing to those rules. And for me, that was the first little light bulb where I was like, we have the same people. And instead of giving them more restrictions, we're giving them more responsibility, and they behave completely differently. They have the same objective coming to that event. Their objective is to have fun, to feel powerful, or to experiment with different forms of thinking. how do we govern our interactions? Is it restrictive, or is it by giving them more responsibility? I would say that was probably the first thing that triggered that thought. I started analyzing other behaviors around me. I started thinking more about society at large. I started having conversations with friends around me.
So that is a very literal way that you got to see that one variable kind of stick out so much, and having a responsibility and more having a common objective amongst a group of people ended up with a better result.
I thought it was very interesting to see how fundamentally you can change somebody's behavior in a similar environment just by changing that variable of how you're telling someone what they can and can't do. I would argue that when you're playing a game, choosing to cheat or not to cheat is quite fundamental, right? You either respect the game and the people you're playing with, or you don't. Yeah, from my point of view, it's a lack of respect if you cheat with someone. You don't respect them enough to follow the same rules, or you assume that they're going to cheat as well, which also is a lack of respect.
So how does that translate to things that you've incorporated into IQM?
I would say that one of the most direct ways that we've integrated that in IQM is my effort to limit how much information we put on people's role descriptions. And when we put information on role descriptions, that they are formulated as a responsibility rather than as a restriction. But it's one of the reasons why there are probably 5 or 6 roles which just have a purpose and a domain. We give you an area of the business, however small it might be, an area of the business. In that domain, it is your responsibility to make it happen, whatever it is. How you do that, it's not my business. I don't want to have to care. I want you to take ownership of that. I want you to feel responsible to make the best out of that domain. And then if you do, that domain will grow, right?
How does that work with working with other people? Because I'm guessing that you saying, I don't want to know, is more from the manager side. How do you feel like as a team, how do we manage that as a team? We do overlap with each other, or do we need to know where something is located, or do you need to know how we do things?
So of course it shouldn't create more friction, right? Because lack of clarity is not good. If you're unclear, it restricts people more than if you're clear. A relatively tricky balance to hold. And that's also why there is a process in place which allows you to clarify things if you have a recurring tension or if there is a tension that needs resolving. And then we document how that tension has been resolved. The main philosophy here is that we don't resolve tensions preemptively. If you think something is going to cause a problem, let's find out. We'll see. And if it then actually happens, we'll deal with it then. Of course, there are scenarios where we do need to preemptively solve things because it would result in a catastrophic failure. The vast majority of day-to-day operations will deal with it then. Or actually, you can trust that people will figure it out amongst themselves because they know what the common objective is. If both people are working towards the same objective, you'll work it out. It's only when you need arbitration to a certain extent that we need to document it because one of the parties feels like otherwise the other party won't hold up their end of the bargain.
In the areas of business that can experiment, we want to be experimenting.
Yes.
Understanding that there's certain laws or legal things that we have to comply with. We want to be working in the way that works best for the people in the business, working towards this larger goal that you have of creating a space that's better for people and not against people.
Yeah, exactly. Is there anything that you have observed which you can match against that?
I would say that the one that stands out for me the most and that I find the most impactful is the way that we do internal tensions, that on a weekly basis discuss ideas we have to improve the business in pretty much any area of the business. It leaves lots of space for improvements to happen quite quickly, which I find really great. You know, speak to your manager, who then to speak to their manager, who has to then come back to you with an idea that's completely different than the one you brought up. And so it doesn't solve the problem you had in the first place. I'd also like it as well because on the manager side, it can be really hard to hear constant issues. I like that you're also not just raising complaints. You're raising attention, an issue that you're facing, and then you also have to share the proposal of you think needs to be done to solve the issue. And that also leaves space if you don't know how it would be solved for us to discuss it as a team. I like that this is raised in our sprint meetings so that we can discuss it as a team. And so it's not, oh, one part of the business is changing and I don't know about it because I'm never part of it. I'm kind of understand how people like to work, how it makes sense for them, and also getting ideas for how I want to change the way I work. And so I find that provides the most clarity in understanding kind of the always experimenting way that we do at IQM.
Yeah. And I think one of the most important parts in that process is the fact that we do it so often. The longer you wait with raising an issue, the heavier it becomes, the more emotionally charged it becomes a complaint. Whereas if we build a trust that you are able to solve issues and change things in the business, it doesn't become a grievance to me. It becomes an observation about the business, about the system, how we can improve that. So I think it changed the tone. The importance of each one of them is lesser. And it changes the tone of how we talk about it because we've practiced this. We practice this all the time. You've seen countless examples of other people interacting with each other saying we should do this differently, we should do that differently. I think that's a very important aspect of why we do things in that way.
The reason why we then choose to pass them or choose to implement different ones is based off of everyone agreeing, but also with the understanding you can't disagree if it doesn't impact you negatively. It's going to be a change that you might not like the idea of trying. Our push is to at least try it. And then if it impacts you negatively, if it causes an issue in another side of business, then we'll change it.
Yeah, the system is biased in favor of changes. It's harder to stop something from changing than it is from changing something because we can always change it back. If you raise a change, the burden falls on me to prove why it shouldn't happen rather than the burden being on you to convince me that I want it to happen. Whether I want or like it is completely irrelevant in this process, which I think makes the conversation also quite a lot easier for everybody involved. I don't have to get emotionally involved because I don't have to be convinced. The default is we'll try it and then we'll see.
Yeah. And the reason why I think it's good that it's raised weekly is so that you don't need to be working in a system for months, find 20 things you don't like about it, and then try to raise that all at once when it's finally too much for you to handle.
I think we're slowly coming to the end of our allocated slot. How do you want to wrap up?
I'm not quite sure. Would you like to discuss the main points of what you think is most important?
What might be interesting is for you to reflect on what would be the next level of granularity you'd like to dig into. What's the next bit we want to uncover from this? We've started kind of at the top of the iceberg, and what's the next part we want to dig into and find out about? Or is there still stuff that we need to discover here and that we need to talk about here?
The part that I think we could discuss next, or that I would like to learn more about, is how does that translate to actual practical strategy and not just constantly seeing this massive goal that we're never achieving? Because you mentioned that it was a goal, and I don't know if that's what I understood from what you were saying. It sounds more like philosophy and more of a how much are we or aren't we aligning with that? It doesn't feel like to me like we're ever going to reach it because it's not something to reach.
Yeah.
It's more of a are we okay with this what we're going to continue to shape the way we work? I think for me that's where I want to understand how we turn that into small or big changes or ways that we work so that we actually do have goals out of it.
So for me, a vision is a goal, right? I agree with you that it is very unlikely that we'll ever achieve it. But I have to believe that it is possible. And so I'm going to treat it as a goal. Otherwise, I don't believe in it. And then what's the point? Even though it might never happen, or it might not happen in my lifetime, I'm going to treat it as if it would. For me, even though it's maybe a goal in 30, 40 years, it is still the dot on the horizon.
And maybe we say that goal then? Because I understand it as a philosophy of trying to organize people in a better way or different ways, while I would see 100 companies implement this as a goal.
Maybe that's the start of the next conversation to say, well, what does good look like? What is the success that we're after? Because for me, there's a tangible, if distant, goal for this organization. And then there is a reason why we're pursuing that goal, which we can succeed in the reason without achieving the goal. So if we never succeed as an individual company and 100 other companies do, then we've still done the right thing, but we've never achieved the goal that we are trying to achieve. We still have to keep trying to achieve it, because that process is what allows us to spread the gospel, if you will.
And so our next PVT will be more focused on what is the goal we're trying to achieve.
Okay, let's talk about it next time.
Thank you for joining us.
Thank you for joining us.
You think I know how to do this?
I mean, that's the whole point, right? We just have a chat and then people watch it.